Well, World War One was a bit of a national ghost.
It was the destruction of a generation.
100 years ago, it would have been us.
We have absolutely no comprehension of what these men went through.
Each segment of that number is a real person. It doesn't hit home until you see the graves.
In January 2015, the cast and crew of a Bedlam production of Journey's End visited the battlefields of Belgium and Northern France.
The opportunity to go to Belgium was amazingly supported by Friends of Bedlam and the Principal of the University, and it meant a lot to be able to lay a wreath at the Menin Gate service on behalf of the university and on behalf of Bedlam.
A century on from World War I, the group intended to gain a better understanding for their roles within R.C. Sherriff's play, written in 1927, under a decade after the close of hostilities. But what transpired provided not just a new perspective on their characters, but on a history they thought they knew.
I suspect that there were a few people, myself included in the cast, that when we heard we were doing this, viewed it as a bit of a jolly and something that would probably involve a great deal of Belgian beer. And it certainly did involve a great deal of Belgian beer, but the perspective of everybody that went out there has changed.
For us as characters, it's fantastic to go and look at the graves and really get into the feeling about the war, so we're not just distanced from it.
Going to Belgium, actually seeing the war graves, seeing the memorials, tied the play down to some kind of reality, which is very easy to forget when you get so heavily involved in script work and heavily involved in acting and performing. It's sometimes you get a bit removed from the reality.
We went to Belgium to bring the history closer to present day, but we also got a greater sense of reality for the characters in the play.
As a cast and crew, we are all the right age, in the sense that 100 years ago it would have been us who would have volunteered or been conscripted, and we would have been there fighting. And this was very clear when every time we went around the graveyards, we would find people not only with our names but also with our ages, sometimes even with our birthdays.
The scope and scale of it is something that we can't really understand sort of from within the safety of the theatre. Being in the places where they were, being in the trenches themselves and seeing all these cemeteries, it gives it greater reality, and it means that the actors can kind of get to grips with what they're trying to portray a lot better.
In order to sort of get the characters down, to really appreciate what they went through and what they experienced, you really have to go there and get an appreciation for what it was like.
The journey from Edinburgh to the hotel in Langemark promised to be a long one, beginning for some at 9:45 p.m. on Wednesday the 14th, but it almost didn't get very far at all.
I pretty much think that coach breaking down an hour outside of Edinburgh was the funniest bit, actually. It was kind of tragic at the same time, but it was pretty funny in retrospect.
We had a long journey where one of the coaches which we were travelling on burnt down. Didn't quite burn down, but it got an engine fire.
I will never be using that service again. It was quite nice handling his penguins. It was exciting to discover the Scottish weather, yeah, I should appreciate that.
We huddled around, had a poncho over our heads, and it was actually surprisingly jolly in the Scottish rain, icy cold hail.
But it was only half an hour, so maybe I could have forgotten about it. But my shoes got wet and didn't dry for the entire trip. And I'm quite ill now, which I blame entirely on National Express. Once I'm better, I intend to write them a strongly worded complaint.
I have some very strong feelings about National Express that I fear for the Friends of Bedlam would not be appropriate.
I was never on the coach, I flew. But I'm really glad I flew. I feel really bad for you guys.
But after an exhausting night, a ferry was caught, and swift progress was made to Calais, where the group made their first stop at a veterans' graveyard, although this one was for World War II.
I think it actually may have been the first graveyard that we went to, which was actually the World War II one.
I think it's, it's important to honour all graves. Anything where there's a specific war.
I realised how many graves there were that just said unknown or known only unto God. All we have now is just this word, which is unknown. And I found that really haunting. Just because there's so much that was just lost and that we will never know.
Eventually, about 20 hours after first departing Edinburgh, the group arrived at their hotel, content to wind away the evening with Belgian beer and bowling.
There was a bowling alley in the hotel, which was also quite good fun.
I think the fact that there was a bowling alley at where we were staying was quite a big bonus.
I was really bad at bowling. That was horrible.
Friday the 16th promised to be a full day of activities. First on the list was a trip to the Vimy Ridge in northern France, home to trenches preserved from the battles fought there in 1917.
Well, for me it was when we first arrived at Vimy Ridge. We got out and walked through the trenches, and to actually see the entire landscape cratered and all these holes everywhere.
Walking around in the trenches and seeing every pothole, every hole that had been created by a shell still there, the only difference being woods and grass growing.
And how close the actual trenches are. They were just within sort of 50 yards or something. Really powerful just to realise just how horrific it must have been for them in those circumstances.
We had the idea that we could recreate some of these
photographs with
our cast and then compare the two.
Just
the pictures? Yeah, we are thinking of recreating like old. It helps you connect with them.
Yeah, I think there's a connection there.
Especially being here with a group of people that are the ages of the war, it's so much easier to see these men as real people, not just photographs.
A short way down the road was the Canadian National Vimy Memorial, commemorating 11,169 missing servicemen. A stunning piece of architecture, it prompted questions about the difference between commemoration and glorification.
It's strange because it's a very beautiful moment when we're all stood around underneath this monument that just reaches up and up. The sky's bright blue and you can see across the Somme for miles. There was a moment when we all gathered at the Canadian Memorial and none of us had been to the graves yet, and we all stood around kind of debating the pointlessness of the war and our thoughts about memorials to war and how is it best to remember these men in a glorified way or just with plaques. And it was really interesting to see how each individual actor reacted to that.
The next site visited was the Agny military cemetery, home to the grave of Edward Thomas, noted poet who died at the Battle of Arras in 1917.
Well, I've always been a fan of Edward Thomas's poetry, so the opportunity to go and visit his grave on the second day while we were on a journey away from Vimy Ridge was fantastic.
He's my favourite poet and he really means a lot to me, so it was really nice to go and visit him in a way.
We put a small memorial down and read 2 poems over his grave, which was very touching. And it got me very much.
Yeah. And being able to read one of his poems at his grave, where he fought, that was really, really moving.
Following this, the group travelled to Beaumont Hamel to see the Newfoundland Memorial Park. Named after the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, which had provided 1 battalion of 800 men to serve with the British and Commonwealth armies, the park also preserves the memory of men from the French, British and German armies who fought and died on the battlegrounds of the Somme.
One particularly beautiful moment was going to the Newfoundland Park Memorial at Beaumont Hamel. All the trenches there are preserved, and there's one tree which has survived the war, which is called the Danger Tree.
It was practically in the middle of no man's land, I think, wasn't it? And yeah, I stood standing throughout the battle there, which I think was pretty remarkable. I remember being told that when I was in, I think it was year 10, I was 14 when I went there. And yeah, I still remembered that. That was something that I thought was just remarkable, that something could survive through that.
On top of the hill there's a statue which the Newfoundland people have made. Their moose is looking towards another moose in another cemetery, and then that moose is looking towards the moose back home on the beach, which is supposed to be a mother moose, and the mother's calling out to her sons back in the fields of France and Belgium. I think the fact of family really hit home, and you can think about in history all these people that existed, but you don't really think of them in a similar way to you. You don't feel like they had mothers and fathers, you feel like it's generations and that sort of thing.
Next up was the Thiepval Memorial, dedicated to 72,195 missing British and South African soldiers lost in the battles of the Somme.
At first it was like, well, Clark's very, very common name, doesn't matter so much, but then seeing actually later at I think it was the Missing of the Somme memorials, and just how many Clarks there were it's more of a deal in a sense, because I was like, oh, Clark, there's loads of people called Clark, but then there were loads of people called Clark that died, and so it just makes it even more harder to think.
Just its sheer size. Like, obviously I've never visited that one before, I visited others before, and you see pictures of things like that, you see pictures of places, and they never seem quite as huge and as, it's the scale of it. You see the names, just so many names, it can't possibly be fit into one picture. And that, it really brings it home to you. Just this sheer size, sheer number, is very shocking.
And there was one particular wall which was West Yorkshire regiment, and looking through it, and just the number of names that I knew of people from school, it made me just picture their faces as soon as I read the surnames, and that really brought it home for me, because it was just like, I can imagine all these people that I knew, just hundreds of people that I knew, all of them would have died.
The scale of the Thiepval Memorial was such that for almost every character within Journey's End, it was possible to find a corresponding surname on the memorial itself. Just behind the memorial, 300 British Commonwealth and 300 French graves stand side by side to commemorate the joint nature of the Anglo-French offensive. The differences in presentation are obvious and prompted different reactions from those on the trip.
Well, my general feeling was that the difference between the French and the English designs was the French just said it as, they were all the same, they said unknown, and the English one, you could see the difference, you could see the different regiments, and for me, I preferred the French design because it, for me, respects the fact that these are people and that they're not just soldiers.
I disagree. I quite like the English graves more. I see where you're coming from about the glorification of them. But obviously, funerals and memorials, they're for the living more than they are for the dead. And so they're going to represent what the living want to put there. But I still prefer the English graves, because even putting the regiment, if they found it on the uniform, or some graves which were unknown, but they knew that they were Scottish because they had a kilt, so they've got from a Scottish regiment. I still love that because it's a grounding in where they were from, and it's a grounding in from where they were in the UK, whatever regiment they went into. But it gives them a bit of personhood, which the unknown, that blank cross, almost denies.
Further down the Somme, the group visited the Lochnagar mine crater, the largest man-made mine crater on the Western Front. It was laid by tunnellers in the British Army and detonated on the 1st of July 1916.
The crater was interesting because before that we'd only gone to graveyards and seen stones and plaques and names and monuments.
It does beg our belief, and you just know that bombs are going off in there and it's blowing the earth around, and you can't then believe how big the crater is, and you can't imagine how big the explosion would have been. And when they say that they heard it in London, for all I know it, I don't think I can actually completely understand and feel it. I think it's one of those things that we'll never understand unless we actually experience it.
A busy day almost complete, a quick stop was made to Poizeres Cemetery on the way home.
Well, for me
Personally, I got to go to Poizeres graveyard on the way back from the Lochnagar crater. We walked there because I had a relative buried there. My dad had texted me briefly to say that I should go there if I could. So I went there, Lieutenant Norton, and I laid a poppy stick. And then I talked to my dad later, after the trip, and I was trying to find out who this Lieutenant Norton was. It turns out he was my grandmother's aunt's brother-in-law, which initially was like, oh, okay, well that's not the closest relation in the world, but whatever, I did my bit. And then he went on to say that actually there is a picture in my grandmother's living room by him. That struck a note, because having that physical link to the past then made everything that much more real. He wasn't just another distant relation, he was someone who had actually, a human being who had actually done and accomplished many, many things.
After a short respite for dinner and to change into clothes less soaked by the Belgian mud, the big moment of the trip arrived. During the last post ceremony at the Menin Gate, members of the cast and crew would lay a wreath on behalf of the University of Edinburgh.
We laid a wreath on behalf of the university at the Menin Gate.
I got to lay the wreath at the last post ceremony, and that was like such an honour, really. And I was nervous about getting it wrong, but I'm so glad that Lorna asked me to do it.
Played a bugle on the last post, and we walked across the road, and I felt myself starting to cry, and I looked, just tried to find somewhere to look, and I typically looked in the crowd, and I spotted Lorna, and she was in the crowd, and she was starting to cry, and that really didn't help. So I got through it, we got up, we laid the wreath, and we came back down. And
the last post ceremony is incredibly moving. It's one of those trays that if you need to cry and think about the last post is actually very helpful.
Yeah. I managed to hold it together, and then directly after the ceremony, someone pointed out to me that near where they laid the wreath was my name on the wall, and I just utterly resolved. It just hit me that. So you see so many names written in one place, 70,000 names of dead people that have died effectively for nothing. It's really difficult to explain until you've felt what it's like.
So when we were at Menin Gate, there were these two women from Perth whose relatives had been in World War I, and they had travelled all the way from Australia to lay a wreath. And I think that was an amazing moment, because you realise that it's not, the war was never isolated to Britain. Like, so many Commonwealth soldiers were involved and gave their lives for it. And the fact that people all across the world are willing to go so far to commemorate that really made me think about the importance of still putting on plays and still remembering the war.
Dedicated to 54,896 fallen men, the gate stands at the heart of Ypres. A last post ceremony has been carried out here every night since the 2nd of July 1928, excluding the occupation between 1940 to 1944.
Every day at Ypres, the fire service comes out, and they elected themselves to do that. The fire service comes out and play the bugle for the ceremony, and they've been doing that for years. I think every day since the Menin Gate was constructed, apart from a brief interlude between 1940 and 1944 during the occupation by Nazi Germany of Ypres, and the day that Ypres was, the siege was lifted and they were relieved, the last post blew again, and I can't imagine what a ceremony like that would have been like.
With an action-packed day at an end, there was still more to come before the journey home. A frosty next morning wasn't the only thing that froze itself into the minds of those on the trip. When cast and crew members were asked to recount a particularly strong moment from the trip, one answer came up time and time again.
Probably going to the German cemetery.
German graves were possibly one of the most moving.
Visiting the German graves.
Langemark,
which was the German one.
Langemark,
the German cemetery.
It was going to the Langemark cemetery.
Langemark, everyone's been saying Langemark.
I was most emotionally affected by the German cemetery.
The Langemark German military cemetery is one of 4 German graveyards in Flanders. The stark contrast to the Commonwealth graves seen the day before affected people strongly.
It was a beautiful morning. It was quite early in the morning, it was frosty, it was bright.
That was a really special moment because you could really see the differences between the Allied cemeteries and the German ones.
It was a lot more stark than the Allied cemeteries.
And it was the lack of like celebration in the dead. So it wasn't about how they had sacrificed their lives for like the good of the Commonwealth and Britain and England and all of that. It was just like cataloguing the dead in a very different way to the Commonwealth ones.
Because the British cemeteries are very sort of everyone is accounted for and catalogued. There are a lot of unknown soldiers, but every single one has a grave. Or if there's no body, then every single one has their name written on a memorial. Whereas in the German cemetery, it's just a slab on the ground. It says 20 unknown soldiers.
Just how empty it felt, because it was all flat. There's no raised headstones. There's 20 names usually on a flat stone. You have the 4 solemn-looking German soldiers standing at the back of the graveyard, and the great trees throughout the place as well.
There was less joy. I mean, it sounds weird to say that there's joy in a cemetery anyway, but at these other places, there was certainly some kind of glory about the fallen men.
It really upset me going to the German cemetery and just seeing how different it was. It didn't sit right with me for some reason.
The thing about this cemetery is the incredible amount of people that are buried there. Sort of in the area of maybe 2 or 3 football pitches, there's 50,000 German dead. There's one German mass grave just as you come in.
25,000 people in a mass grave, that was tiny.
It actually made me very angry to see it because they didn't get a great glorified death.
And I think it contains about at least twice, maybe not 3 times, the number of people that are in Tynecot, the graveyard we did afterwards. But it's so much more compact and small. It hit home very, very, very hard, I think.
In all, 44,294 German soldiers are commemorated at Langemark. By contrast, the Tynecot cemetery honours 11,954 soldiers. Predominantly from the Commonwealth, the graveyard also contains a French grave and 4 German headstones.
And then when we went to Tynecot, how many was there? Like 12,000, and that was huge, and that was like, I don't know, that was a real shock to see that many graves. But then reflecting on the German cemetery, you realised that there was even more than that, like much more than that in the German cemetery.
One of the things that hit me about Tynecot was as soon as you walk in, there's just rows and rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of just white graves standing like soldiers, regiments of soldiers. And as you're walking in, you only see the back of the gravestones. You don't see the names or the crosses on the front of them, you only see the blank backs. And for me, I think that has just as much meaning as if you're looking at it from the front. It just shows that it is anonymous, and even though you've written their name on a piece of stone, that doesn't mean that the person who has their name is any more significant than the person whose name they don't know.
The thing that got me about Tynecot was when I got further into the cemetery, and there were these graves that were at odd angles compared to everything else was very straight rows. And I asked somebody about why they were at these angles, and they told me the reason they were at these angles is because this is where they died originally.
And then hearing Lorna reading Anthem for Doomed Youth as well, in front of the cross and the remembrance stone, that really got me.
There was one moment in Belgium which was kind of like my other moving moment, which is where Ross Bailey, who's playing Osborne, we were in Tynecot, and I found a grave that had his initials, and the soldier that was buried there was from like a similar area to him, and the epitaph was, "He died for his friend."
And again, I think just seeing all the headstones is one thing, but just seeing your name on there, it just kind of makes it a bit more personal.
I remember going to find Ross and showing it to him, and like, I think for him, seeing something so similar to him, but the boy who died was like 19 years old, that was such a hard moment, because I could see how difficult it was for him.
You know, I have no idea if I was related to that person or not, but we shared something, we shared the name, and they died when they were so young and they died so nobly. It's humbling.
And I think that's when I realised how much the trip had impacted on people.
The final stop on the journey was to Essex Farm Cemetery, home to the remains of Valentine Strudwick, who died in battle at the age of 15. It also contains a series of bunkers preserved from the fighting.
Essex Farm, yeah, Essex Farm, the vastness of it, and it was a nice day as well. I think that's what made it sort of a little more touching. And you could feel the sun on your face actually, and it had been a cold trip, and that was the one time that I felt warm actually. And you were seeing all these graves, and it's just like it really is crazy and just so sad.
A really interesting thing for me was realising that sandbags actually turned to concrete after a couple of years, and I was walking along by the bunkers, stroking the wall, and turned around and said, "Oh, these look like sandbags." And Ben Schofield, the multiple person that he is, told me, "Yeah, they are." And that realisation that these are actual objects that the men saw, the view was not obstructed at all, was really harrowing.
And that was the point where I kind of realised, you know, this play is it's deadly serious, and we need to do it to honour these soldiers that fought and died, so many of whom we have no idea, in unmarked graves.
From there, the cast and crew began to make the long journey home to Edinburgh, fresh and inspired by their experiences on the trip. But there was one unexpected moment yet to come.
Well, I'd never seen Blackadder before, which is a big one, because that's the best comedy ever. So seeing that on the bus and finishing with the last episode just as we got back, that was a really moving ending, I thought.
Well, I had seen Blackadder before countless times, and that one always gets me because it's so light-hearted, and then suddenly there's this moment of kind of realising what the whole period is about. I think having gone to the front line and having seen the way that the landscape has changed, and having seen the amount of cemeteries that there are, and just the complete destruction of it, somehow that changing into a field of poppies was so much harder than it had been before, because you finally understand it.
The whole trip in Belgium was like emotionally draining, and every time you went to a grave, a new cemetery, it was like your mind went back to the same like dark place that it had been another few times, and then every time it went back there it was even harder. So it kind of built up this kind of group sadness. And then when we were on the coach back from Dover to London, and we were watching the last episode of Blackadder, and at the end I was crying, and I looked around and everybody else was crying. It just felt like it had been building, like the whole trip had been building to that. So that was a very poignant moment for me.
It would be very easy to see a trip like this as one constant grim experience when presented with graveyard after graveyard. But like Blackadder, there were plenty of lights and laughs within the darkness.
Something that I really enjoyed was the Belgian beer.
And teaching Ross how to play Ring of Fire, that was quite a significant moment. He loved it so much.
Ross is our token mature student. He's playing Osborne, and getting him drunk playing Ring of Fire was a lot of fun.
Stopnachtwinkels. I imagine as the name of a shop isn't particularly humorous for people that live in Belgium, but I thought it was hilarious.
Oh yeah, drunken runs to random convenience stores. We're not going to talk about that.
No, there were good moments. There was a lot of free food. I found I was so full that I was nearly sick. So that was my highlight of the trip.
Well, Lewis, playing Hardy, got very ill, was very sick, and as the days went on, he looked more and more like he'd been living in these trenches and more sick, which was particularly amusing.
People should bother to come and see it because I grew this moustache, and that in itself is an act of self-sacrifice, I believe, equal to anything that happened in World War I.
We had lovely weather, which was lucky. So yeah, we did have fun. It sounds like it was the most depressing trip of the world, but and the group of the cast and crew are such an amazing group of people that it's great to spend any kind of time with them.
Coming back to the hotel was lovely because we could put the emotional side of it on pause while we kind of relaxed and got back to ourselves. and then prepare ourselves for the next day, because the trip was very, very emotionally straining.
One cannot live in a cemetery or graveyard. The living honour the dead by living, appreciating the gift given to them by those that fell 100 years ago. But the war that was named to end all wars has not lived up to that billing. So why is it still important that the cast and crew visited the battlefields and that plays like Journey's End are still performed?
Like I said before, because 100 years ago it would have been us.
Journey's End is still relevant now because war is still relevant now.
Of course, the centenary is a brilliant excuse to revive all of the literature from the war and everyone start talking about it again. But I personally feel like it is too late. It makes me rather angry that we left it until there were no survivors left to start talking to people about the war.
But when you see Journey's End and get an actual story behind those names, it makes it makes it just so much more real, I guess.
But also there are still wars being fought, there are still people dying, and it remains relevant as long as there is conflict in the world.
Remembering the history and remembering wars that have gone before that everybody at the time thought were necessary, but clearly we know now were not. I think it helps you to judge what is right in the present day.
It's one thing to show people that maybe didn't learn about it. People might go to the theatre and think about it and actually think more about what the lives were of people that lived there.
It's so relevant. The themes of this play, it was written 100 years ago, fair enough. The relevance, it's not necessarily anti-war, but it goes into great detail about the thoughts and feelings of the men that died on behalf of their countrymen, that sacrificed themselves for what they believed was a great cause.
Questions the viewer and the actors about whether that's justifiable.
Continues to haunt our sense of cultural identity as well. So putting it on through culture, through Bedlam, is a perfect place to exhibition it, really.
And I feel like doing it for the centenary is a great way to remind people how the war wasn't just a fact that happened, or the part of history that just happened.
That even if it is something small, it can be as small as a theatre performance, that even if it only reaches a couple of hundred people, it's a couple of hundred people more than beforehand. And if that's what we can do, then so be it.
The show is being performed at Bedlam Theatre in Edinburgh from Tuesday the 3rd to Saturday the 7th of February. With a cast and crew inspired from their experiences in Belgium, it should prove to be an exemplary set of performances. But more importantly, by infusing new life into the stories of the past and reinvigorating their memories, for the fallen there need perhaps never truly be a final journey's end.